Hey everyone, this is Nick, and today we're going to talk about something different. We're going to talk about CentOS, the last real version of CentOS that is still supported. Well, it's only supported for a little bit now, as it's going end of life in 2 months. And we need to talk about it, because this could leave a significant gap in the Linux enterprise space. So, since TuxCare has been a sponsor of the channel for years now, and they're actually experts at this Linux enterprise thing, I thought they could be very helpful in fleshing out this look at CentOS, what it is, why it going end of life is not exactly the same as the usual end of life distro, and potential solutions for people who might want to keep running CentOS 7 or move to something else. And that's also why TuxCare is the sponsor of this entire video. So let's just begin with a quick recap of what CentOS is and why CentOS 7 is still pretty popular. CentOS is short for Community Enterprise Operating System, and it started as one of the first Red Hat Enterprise Linux clones. It was built from Red Hat Enterprise Linux sources, and it was 100% binary compatible. The distro quickly became one of the most popular distros for servers, even overtaking the good old Debian in 2010, for a little while at least. Debian regained its crown. In 2014, Red Hat announced they would sponsor the CentOS project, probably seeing the advantage in fostering an ecosystem around their own enterprise offering, to convert organizations to Red Hat Enterprise Linux when they needed more support, and to make sure developers had a solid platform to target. That's why Red Hat gained ownership of all the trademarks around CentOS, and also why they employed most major CentOS contributors directly. Unfortunately, at the end of 2020, Red Hat announced that CentOS would be discontinued, at least in its current Red Hat Enterprise Linux clone form, and it would now be distributed as CentOS Stream, which isn't really the same kind of distribution. Instead of being a rebuild of RHEL, which is what people mostly used CentOS for, it's basically RHEL's upstream, from which the next version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux will be built. Stream is also a rolling release, meaning that it's likely not suitable for a lot of people who rely on CentOS. And with that, CentOS 8 was quickly discontinued in December 2021, leaving CentOS 7 as the only version that is still supported. And CentOS 7 will now be end of life at the end of June 2024, meaning that if you want a full rebuild of RHEL and CentOS Stream doesn't work for you, you have to find another solution. And this isn't really like any other distro going end of life, because in most cases you usually have a direct upgrade path from one Ubuntu LTS to another, or from one major OpenSUSE lib version to another, or one major Red Hat version to another. In the case of CentOS, there's no upgrade path. It's either you go CentOS Stream or you move to something else entirely. There is no continuation of CentOS as it once was. Now, CentOS is still a very popular distribution on servers. First, a worrying statistic. Out of all current CentOS users in early 2024, more than half use CentOS 6 or 8, meaning they're using end-of-life distros without security patches from their original developers. Now, the main reasons why organizations would stick to either unmaintained end-of-life versions of CentOS or with CentOS 7 as it is going end-of-life, it's very likely because there is no direct upgrade path. If you're on CentOS 8, you can't move to something else from CentOS. If you use CentOS 6, you could upgrade to 7, but migrating to a new distro that goes end of life in 2 months isn't necessarily worth it. And if you're on CentOS 7, you cannot upgrade to version 8 because it is also end of life. Meaning that if your workflow or your server fleet depends on using CentOS exactly, you're out of luck. You can either move to another Red Hat Enterprise Linux clone like Rocky Linux or Alma Linux, or you just have to stick with it even though it's unmaintained. And, well, not a lot of current CentOS users are planning on doing that. Only about 20% of CentOS 7 and 8 users are going to migrate to another enterprise Linux distro. And about 17% of users of CentOS 7 or 8 plan on continuing to use these versions even without support, which is obviously a very bad decision. And do not do that. Seriously, running your server without any security patches or support is the best way to get that server compromised And it's even worse if you do this as you're working for a specific company or an organization. So what are the solutions if you're stuck on CentOS 7? What can you do? Well, I asked Joao Correia from TuxCare. You might also know him from the Enterprise Linux Security Podcast, which he co-hosts with Jay from Learn Linux TV, also available here on YouTube. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, do you have any statistics about CentOS usage in general? Because I plucked a few from the study TuxCare did early this year on, well, the landscape of Enterprise Linux, but I didn't see any statistics. I saw statistics for CentOS usage among CentOS users, but not necessarily CentOS usage as a whole. Do you have any numbers on that?
Well, as you can imagine, it's really tricky getting those numbers and having reliable numbers from it. No, the short answer is no. We don't have a reliable way of providing you with those numbers. Anecdotal evidence has been that a couple of years ago, CentOS was the most widely used web server on the internet, like 3 or 4 years ago. And that was reported by the companies that do browser studies and all of that, and they came out with that statistic. How well that holds up or not, I don't know if it's still accurate or not today. There's actually one interview with Greco Hartman from the Linux kernel where he mentioned that most servers are running Debian anyway, or Debian-based anyway. So I don't know exactly what changed or why it changed, but again, I cannot provide you with those accurate numbers because I don't have them myself. And it's really tricky to measure that.
Okay, so the next question will be generally, what is the specific problem with CentOS 7 going end of life? How is it different from, let's say, an Ubuntu LTS going end of life specifically?
Well, with an Ubuntu LTS, you have the next Ubuntu LTS to migrate to, and you're going to stay on the same architecture, and everything is going to stay in the same place on the new system. So the migration path is there. With CentOS 7, weirdly enough, going out of support after CentOS 8, for some reason that Red Hat came up with. But the main difference there is that there's no obvious target to move to. There's nothing that says that, okay, this is the next CentOS. You have CentOS Stream, but from the start it was immediately shown not to be exactly the right path to migrate to. You're not getting an apples to apples comparison when you move to Stream. For one, the update cadence is not the same. You're not getting updates every 3 or 4 weeks. You're getting updates every other day, for example, and that just doesn't fit with the regular enterprise schedule.
So now let's talk a little bit about the options that you have if you're currently a CentOS user, hopefully CentOS 7 and not 6 or 8 without patches. What can you do? The first one is obviously to stick to CentOS 7 as it is without any support. Everyone that runs a server or a company or an organization knows that this is not a good idea, but can you just tell us quickly why this is really not something people should do?
Let me give you some context, and for this we do have statistics. CentOS 6 has been out of support for 4 years, something like that. CentOS 8 for about 2 years, 2 and something. There have been over 2,000 high and critical vulnerabilities that affect each of those since they went end of life. Over 2,000 vulnerabilities for which there will be no update forthcoming, for which your systems, if you're still running them, have no remediation in place and they are vulnerable to those vulnerabilities. And that's a very risky proposition. If you have, even if it's just one server in the corner tucked away, out of sight, nobody really cares too much about it, that's the security gap that you have in your infrastructure, and that's what's going to be targeted by threat actors. And additionally, if your organization operates in some industry that has any form of regulation around cybersecurity, for example, that says you need to patch within 4 weeks at most or something like that, it doesn't matter how long you have to patch. You will not have the patches, so you will immediately fall out of compliance. And that can be business threatening. If you're operating in healthcare, for example, and your equipment goes out of support because they're no longer maintained, they no longer receive patches, you have to stop using that equipment. And that's very costly. So running it unsupported, it's not just the risk, it's the compliance, it's the regulations. And it's the fact that the threat actors know exactly the same as we all do. So they know that if they spot a system that's running an out of support operating system, That's where they're going to target, because it won't get fixes anytime. They can take their time in finding the right way to exploit it, and they're secure in knowing, nobody's going to be able to remediate the new problem that just came out, and we have all the time in the world to exploit it.
Yeah, so it's not just like you would say, oh, I don't care, I'm still running like Windows XP or Ubuntu 14.04 on my own personal computer that's not connected to the internet. It's a server. Obviously, it is connected to the internet, and even if it's your home server, or even if you think it's just like this little weird part to host your personal files, it's not a good solution.
To be more precise, if you're running in an environment where you just have a single server, well, that's easy to migrate. You take a weekend off or something like that, you take it down for a few hours, you find an alternative, you migrate your workload, and you're done. When scale gets in the way, when you have thousands of systems running, when you have hundreds of systems running a specific role and they're all on top of CentOS and now it's out of support, that's when you have a problem. That's when you have to plan, you have to test, you have to deploy the migration. There will be problems, you'll have to roll back, and all of these steps take a lot of time. And if you haven't started looking at the problem right now, in the 2 months until the end of life date, you're not having the time to do it properly anyway.
Yeah, so that was the next option that you can get if you're using CentOS 7. It's to move to something else. You just leave CentOS 7 and you try another distribution, whether it's moving to something completely different, like, I don't know, something Debian based, or you're moving to another built on top of Red Hat source code distribution, something maybe like Alma Linux, like Rocky Linux, or you can move to OpenSUSE, whatever. Moving to another distribution. What are the challenges with that? So obviously it is a lot of time to plan, to prepare, but generally, what are the challenges? First, to move to something that isn't at all like Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
Well, if you're moving to something completely different, say you're moving from something that's Red Hat based like CentOS to something that's Debian based like an Ubuntu, for example, then basically it depends on your workload, but you're going to have issues like library versions not being the same as shipped with both systems, files not being in the same place, the configuration files might not have exactly the same syntax, package names might be different, files might not be where the system is expecting them, the syntax for certain commands might change. Just look at, for example, HTTPD versus Apache. It immediately affects the name of the modules, it immediately affects your deployment scripts. That's a lot of work. If you stay within the same ecosystem, like you mentioned, for example, Alma Linux or Rocky or even Oracle, for example, staying with those means that while it's not a direct upgrade path, at least you don't have to change your tooling extensively. At least you can expect your automation scripts to continue to run and your monitoring tools to find the right values in the places that they have already been doing so far. And that's an easier migration path that you have available, staying in the same ecosystem, to say something like that. And it's important to realize here something that Red Hat seems to be missing with all of the changes that it's forcing. But the value of RHEL itself, it's in its ecosystem. It's in the number of distributions that are running on top of the same code base. It's not the code itself that ships with RHEL, it's that the environment is stable. Staying within that stable environment means that you can continue to run the same applications that have been developed for RHEL. And that's very important. Moving to something different means that the certification, for example, again, going back to the example of healthcare, suppose you have a CT scan machine that's costs $1 million or something like that, and it's running CentOS 7, and now you have to migrate that away. That machine has been certified to run with that specific software stack. If you change the software stack enough, you're going to have to recertify it, and that takes time, takes resources, and it might even fail the certification. And that's not a position that you want to be in. So you want to avoid making as many changes as possible, so you're going to ideally stick with something closer.
Now that's two options, moving to another distro or staying without patches. There's a final one, which is, well, extending the support and the lifecycle of CentOS 7, so you can at least stay on it for a bit longer and plan the migration. Can you tell us a little bit more about the principle, how easy or hard it is to implement, and generally how long-term of a solution is it?
Absolutely. So extended lifecycle support, as the name immediately implies, means that you extend the time in which you receive security updates. The deployment process itself, it's extremely simple. It's just adding a new repository to the system, and now the updates will simply come from that new repository rather than the one you were using before. So there is no disruption, there is no downtime, there's nothing like that. You just deploy a new repository, which is basically adding a package to the system that adds a configuration file for that repo, and then the updates will continue. That means all of the tooling that you use continues to work, all the scripts that you use continue to work, all the monitoring continues to run just as it did before, and there is absolutely nothing else involved with that. Now, the benefit is that instead of being forced into a migration that you're basically just going to have to do because a certain date approaches in the calendar, now you have an additional up to 5 more years to plan that, to find the right migration path, and to properly do that migration. This just gives you the option, and basically it gives you back control over the decision. It's no longer forced upon you, but you can do that when you find it most adequate. For example, you can mirror the upgrade for the operating system, and you can make it match your hardware renewal cycle, for example. You're upgrading your servers, fine, now I deploy a new operating system, and now I migrate my workload, rather than doing one thing now and another 2 years from now, and just keep repeating it. Having been a sysadmin previously, and having faced this situation, say for CentOS 5 or even earlier than that, and having to deal with that problem when it happened, at the time, and this is something that over time has changed and over time has evolved, but people don't really realize how it used to be. CentOS was a distribution in which you didn't do upgrades. Whenever a new version came along, the official position was that you don't upgrade, you install a new system and you move your workload. And that's entirely different from what we've had since CentOS 6 and 7 and even 8. And unfortunate for the people that moved from 7 to 8, because those were the ones that got the short end of the stick there. But it didn't used to be like that. So having an option like extended lifecycle support that gives you this amount of extra time in which you can continue to run your system securely, this is really a game changer. This is why people care so much about long-term support systems. They want to avoid as much as possible introducing change into the infrastructure, because that usually means disruption and possibility of breaking stuff. So having the ability to run the same stuff for longer gives you that peace of mind, and that's very valuable for the enterprise space.
The only question I would have is, if you can get extended support, should you get extended support for CentOS 8 or for CentOS 7?
You can get for either of them. We provide you with extended support for either of them. But the ultimate goal with extended support is that you will eventually have to migrate at some point. You're just postponing that date until such a time as it's convenient for you. So migrating from CentOS 7 to CentOS 8, you're essentially in the same dead end. So if you're on 7 and you have the ability to stay secure for an additional 5 years, migrating in the meantime for 8 is not necessarily an ideal position. You can do so if there's any feature in 8 that you're still interested in. But you would ideally be looking at an alternative that is not that dead end solution.
Yeah, but basically you should probably just get extended support for what you already use, because there's not much benefit. The goal being to extend what you already know and not having too many migrations to handle. Migrating to something new, then getting extended support is just an extra step that you don't really need. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Nick. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye. Okay, so the gist of the issue here is that contrary to other distributions going end of life, this time it's not the version of the distro that is being shelved, it's the entire distribution itself. And in the end, it is an important topic, because right now it's happening to CentOS, but it could happen to another distro in the future. Maybe it goes immutable and that doesn't suit your workflow. Maybe it gets bought out, or it gets closed down, or it changes in ways that aren't suitable for what you want to accomplish. It is a good case study in how you can make your whole server or even workstation fleet more adaptable and more resilient to change. Okay, so this will conclude this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, there's the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, the comment section, you know, all the usual YouTube pleasantries. And if you really enjoyed the channel, there are also plenty of links to support it down in the description. So, thanks everyone for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!